Her voice broke on the third sentence, and someone in the back of the room laughed. Not loudly, just a quick sound that might have been a cough, except that it was not. The girl stopped reading. She looked down at the letter in her hands. The paper was creased from being folded and unfolded many times. Her father had written it 6 days before he died, and she had carried it in her jacket pocket for 2 months. She was standing at a podium in the community center in Pawnee City, Nebraska, on the evening of April 7th, 2018. There were 42 people in the room. Most of them were farmers. Some of them thought she should not be there. The meeting had been called by the Pawnee County Farm Bureau to discuss the future of a 300-acre farm that sat 2 miles east of town. The farm had belonged to the girl's father. His name had been Thomas Brennan. He had died on February 3, 2018, at the age of 51 from complications related to diabetes. He had left the farm to his daughter in a will that had been filed with the county clerk on January 28th. The daughter's name was Abigail Brennan. She was 19 years old. She had been a sophomore at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, studying animal science when her father died. She had withdrawn from school after the funeral. She had come home to Pawnee City, and she had moved into the farmhouse alone. The farm had been in the Brennan family since 1961. Thomas had inherited it from his father in 1995. He had farmed it by himself for 23 years. He had grown corn and soybeans, and he had run a small cow-calf operation. He had been a careful farmer. He had rotated his crops, and he had maintained his equipment, and he had never carried more debt than he could service. The land was paid for. The equipment was old, but it was functional. Thomas had not been wealthy, but he had been solvent. When he died, the members of the Farm Bureau had assumed the land would be sold. Abigail was 19. She was a girl. She had no experience running a farm by herself. The general expectation was that she would lease the ground to someone local or sell it outright and go back to college. That would have been the sensible thing to do, but Abigail had not done the sensible thing. She had filed a notice with the Farm Service Agency stating her intent to operate the farm herself. She had applied for an operating loan. She had begun purchasing seed and fertilizer for spring planting. People had heard about this and they had opinions. Some of those people were at the meeting. If you have ever been doubted because of who you are instead of what you know, this story is yours. Hit subscribe. The president of the Farm Bureau was a man named Roger Stanton. He was 63 years old, and he had been farming in Pawnee County since 1978. He had called the meeting because several members had asked him to. They wanted to know what Abigail was planning. They wanted to know if she understood what she was taking on. Roger had invited her to come and explain herself. Abigail had agreed to come. She had arrived at the community center at 6:30 in the evening. She had worn jeans and a blue button-down shirt and work boots that were clean but worn. She had brought the letter with her. She had not planned to read it out loud. She had brought it because it steadied her to have it close. Roger had opened the meeting by introducing Abigail. He had said, "Most of you knew Tom Brennan. His daughter Abigail is here tonight to talk about the farm. I have asked her to share her plans." He had gestured to the podium. Abigail had stood and walked to the front of the room. She had started by saying thank you for the opportunity to speak. She had said she knew people had questions about whether she could manage the farm. She had said she understood their concerns. She had said she wanted to explain why she believed she could do it. That was when she had pulled the letter from her pocket and unfolded it. She had said, "My father wrote this to me 6 days before he died. I would like to read it to you." She had begun reading. Her voice had been steady at first. Then it had cracked. Then someone had laughed. She stood at the podium now with her head down. The room was quiet. Roger Stanton was watching her. So was a man named Curtis Epp, who farmed 1,200 acres north of Pawnee City and who had known Thomas Brennan for 30 years. Curtis was sitting in the third row. He did not turn around to see who had laughed. He just kept watching Abigail. She lifted her head. She took a breath. She started reading again. "Abby," the letter said, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I am writing this while I still have the clarity to say what I need to say. I know you will have decisions to make about the farm. People will tell you to sell it, or lease it, or let someone else run it. They will say you are too young. They will say farming is too hard for a girl on her own. Do not listen to them. You are not too young, and you are not incapable. I have been teaching you since you were 8 years old. You know this land. You know this work. You are ready. Abigail's voice was steady now. She continued, I have kept notebooks for you. They are in the filing cabinet in the office. There are 12 of them. They cover everything I know about this farm. Which fields drain well and which ones hold water. Which seed varieties perform best in which soil types. When to spray and when to wait. How to read the grain markets. How to deal with the co-op and the elevator and the equipment dealers. I wrote it all down because I wanted you to have it. I wanted you to have my mistakes and my corrections and my small, accumulated knowledge. That is what a father leaves, not just land, knowledge. She paused. She turned the page. You will have help if you ask for it. Curtis Epp is a good man, and he will answer questions if you call him. Roger Stanton can be stubborn, but he is fair. Raymond Kohler at the bank will work with you if you are honest with him about your numbers. Do not be afraid to ask. Farmers help each other. That is how it works. Someone in the audience shifted in their chair. Abigail did not look up. She kept reading. The farm is not much. 300 acres is small by modern standards. The equipment is old. The income is modest. But it is paid for, and it is yours, and it will sustain you if you work it carefully. I have run the numbers. If you farm it the way I have been farming it, you will clear $20,000 to $30,000 a year after expenses in an average year. That is enough to live on if you are not extravagant. In good years, you will make more. In bad years, you will make less. You will need to save in the good years to cover the bad ones. That is the discipline. Abigail's hands were not shaking anymore. She read the final paragraph. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. You are smarter than I ever was, and you are braver than you know. Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot do this. You can. I have watched you. I have seen you pay attention. I have seen you ask the right questions. You are a farmer, Abby. You just do not know it yet. Trust yourself. Trust the land. It will teach you what I could not. I love you, Dad. Abigail folded the letter and put it back in her pocket. She looked up at the room. She said, That is why I am staying, because my father believed I could do this, and because he taught me how. The room was silent. Then Curtis Epp stood up. He said, What are you planting this spring? Abigail said, 180 acres of corn and 120 of soybeans. Same rotation my father used. Curtis said, What corn variety? Abigail said, Golden Harvest G12T38 for the South Fields and Pioneer 1197 for the North 80. My father's notebooks say the Pioneer does better in the heavier ground. Curtis nodded. He said, That is correct. Do you have the equipment to plant? Abigail said, I have the planter. I need to replace the seed meters on rows 4 and 7. I have the parts ordered. Curtis said, Do you know how to install them? Abigail said, I have done it before. My father showed me. Roger Stanton spoke from the front of the room. He said, Abby, what is your plan for the cattle? Abigail said, I am selling them. I do not have the time or the capital to manage both crops and livestock right now. I am keeping 3 cows for my own use. The rest are going to auction in May. A woman in the second row raised her hand. Her name was Janet Maloley, and she was married to a farmer who ran a hog operation west of town. She said, Who is going to help you with harvest? Abigail said, I am hiring a custom cutter. I have already talked to Ben Stratton. He said he would put me in his schedule. Janet said, Ben is reliable. That is a good choice. Another man spoke. His name was Leonard Dutton. He said, Do you have crop insurance? Abigail said, Yes, I renewed my father's policy with the same agent he used. I am carrying revenue protection at 75% coverage. Leonard said, That is smart. The questions continued for 20 minutes. Abigail answered each one. She knew her numbers. She knew her costs. She knew which fields had been tiled and which had not. She knew the yield history for every 80-acre parcel. She knew because she had read her father's notebooks and because she had worked beside him every summer since she was in middle school. When the question stopped, Roger Stanton said, "Does anyone else have concerns?" Nobody spoke. Roger said, "All right then, Abby, thank you for coming. I think you have answered what people needed to hear." Curtis Epp walked up to Abigail after the meeting ended. He said, "Your father was right about you." Abigail said, "Thank you." Curtis said, "If you need help with anything, call me. I mean that." Abigail said she would. Janet Maloney stopped her on the way out. She said, "Whoever laughed at you was wrong to do it. You did fine." Abigail planted the farm in May of 2018. She did the work herself. She spent 14-hour days on the tractor. She checked the planter every morning, and she greased the fittings, and she replaced the worn parts. The corn went in first. The soybeans went in 2 weeks later. The stand was good. She walked the fields in June and counted the emergence. The population was where it needed to be. The summer was dry, but not catastrophic. She irrigated the south fields using the pivots her father had maintained. The corn grew to shoulder height by the end of July. The soybeans filled in thick. She scouted for insects and weeds. She sprayed when necessary. She kept notes in a small notebook she carried in her truck. Harvest came in October. Ben Stratton brought his combine to her farm on the 12th. The corn averaged 168 bushels per acre. The soybeans averaged 49. Abigail sold the corn at $3.52 per bushel. She sold the soybeans at $9.14. After paying for seed, fertilizer, chemicals, fuel, crop insurance, the custom cutting, and the operating loan interest, she cleared $27,000. She paid off the operating loan in November. She put $12,000 into savings. She used the rest for living expenses and to repair the grain dryer that had failed in September. She farmed the land again in 2019, in 2020, and 2021. The yields varied, but the farm remained profitable. In 2022, she had a corn crop that averaged 183 bushels per acre, and she cleared $41,000. She used part of that to buy a used John Deere 4440 tractor to replace the one her father had been nursing along for 10 years. She is 25 now. She still farms the 300 acres. She has added a 60-acre parcel that she leases from a neighbor who retired. She does her own maintenance on the equipment. She does her own bookkeeping. She attends the Farm Bureau meetings. People no longer question whether she can manage the farm. They know she can. Curtis Epp still farms north of Pawnee City. He stops by Abigail's place 2 or 3 times a year to check on her. He told a friend once that Tom Brennan raised his daughter right. He said, "Tom taught her everything, and then he wrote it down so she would not forget." That is what good fathers do. Roger Stanton retired from the Farm Bureau in 2021. Before he stepped down, he told the board that Abigail Brennan was one of the most competent young farmers in Pawnee County. He said she had proven that competence is not about age or gender. It is about knowledge and discipline and willingness to work. The letter Abigail read at the meeting is still in her jacket pocket. She does not read it often, but she carries it. She says it reminds her that her father trusted her even when other people did not. She says that trust was the inheritance that mattered most. The person who laughed when her voice cracked has never identified themselves. Abigail does not know who it was. She does not care. She said once that people laugh at what they do not understand. She said her father understood. That was enough. They laughed at her cracked voice because they thought emotion was weakness. They were wrong. The emotion was grief and love and the weight of a father's faith in his daughter. That is not weakness. That is strength carried in the voice of someone who knows what they have lost and what they have been given. She read the letter because it said what she could not say on her own. It said she was ready. It said she was capable. It said the land was hers not because she inherited dirt, but because she inherited knowledge. Her father had spent 23 years learning that land, and he had written it down so she would not have to start from zero. That was the gift, not the 300 acres. The 12 notebooks that taught her how to farm them. People expected her to fail. She did not fail. She planted and harvested and managed and saved, and she did it alone because that was what her father had prepared her to do. The letter was not just sentiment, it was a roadmap. It was permission. It was proof that someone who knew her believed in her. She still farms the land her father left her. The land still produces. The knowledge still holds. That is what lasts.